Yes, it's all Rachel Zegler and her behavior. And if it was just one comment, it probably would have been forgotten by now. And it became such a disaster that they had to shut her up, which was the smartest move they made.
Okay. Looking like a complete slob. Hungover as hell.
I don't need your business. You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film.
Rachel Zegler was supposed to become Hollywood's next breakout star, but instead, she's now at the center of one of Disney's biggest disasters in recent memory. It all started with Disney's ambitious reimagining of Snow White, a live-action reboot that promised to redefine the classic for a modern audience. But almost overnight, that dream spiraled into a corporate nightmare that executives are desperately trying to erase from existence. Quietly, without any announcement or fanfare, Disney began pulling Snow White from theaters and shelves nationwide. What should have been a guaranteed billion-dollar blockbuster instead turned into an embarrassing box office failure, leaving theater owners begging Disney for permission to replace screenings with virtually anything else. Even low-budget independent films drew larger crowds. The humiliation reached viral proportions when a fan's video surfaced online, capturing an eerily empty theater with barely 2 viewers inside, transforming Disney's hopeful comeback into a laughingstock meme overnight. But the heart of this catastrophic collapse wasn't just poor box office numbers, it was Rachel Zegler herself. From the moment the project was announced, Rachel stirred controversy with polarizing public statements, openly dismissing the beloved 1937 original and confidently promising audiences a groundbreaking film. Instead, what followed was a public relations disaster, as Rachel's image crumbled under relentless online backlash and industry criticism. Her confident pre-release bravado quickly turned into emotional breakdowns on live streams and desperate attempts at damage control, further alienating the few supporters she had left. This wasn't just another failed movie. It was a perfect storm that could reshape Disney's entire strategy moving forward. Internally, executives scrambled behind the scenes, quietly erasing references to Snow White from marketing and future plans. Now, Rachel's future in Hollywood hangs precariously by a thread as studios rethink working with her entirely. How did Rachel Zegler, once praised as Hollywood's rising star, become the face of one of the entertainment industry's most spectacular flops? The truth behind this collapse is more shocking, more chaotic, and more explosive than anyone imagined. And it's only now beginning to come to light. Disney never imagined that Snow White, their highly anticipated live-action reboot, would fail this spectacularly. The film's catastrophic reception stunned everyone, from casual moviegoers to seasoned Hollywood insiders. Quietly and without any fanfare, Disney began systematically pulling Snow White from theaters nationwide, an almost unprecedented move that signaled just how dire the situation had become. Theater owners, initially bound by strict contracts requiring them to screen the film, started openly rebelling. Attendance was so shockingly low that theaters didn't even bother asking for Disney's permission. They simply swapped out showings of Snow White for literally anything else available, desperately trying to salvage their revenue. The collapse quickly became impossible to hide when a video went viral, capturing the bleak reality inside theaters. A fan posted footage from a weekend matinee, narrating the eerie scene. Okie dokie, walking into Snow White at 2 p.m. Let's see how empty it is. The camera panned across rows of empty seats, revealing just 2 lone viewers. It felt less like a major Disney premiere and more like an abandoned screening of a forgotten indie film. That viral clip became emblematic of Disney's embarrassing failure, and soon it was all anyone could talk about. But it wasn't just domestically that Disney faced humiliation. Internationally, things got worse. Lebanon outright banned the movie completely, refusing distribution and pulling screenings entirely, a move that further damaged the film's reputation worldwide. Adding insult to injury, even Disney's merchandise strategy failed dramatically. Snow White dolls, mugs, and t-shirts, produced in deliberately limited quantities to generate demand, sat untouched on store shelves months after release. Disney couldn't give the merchandise away. Behind closed doors, executives panicked as the losses mounted. Marketing quietly vanished, and references to the film disappeared from social media. Disney was effectively trying to erase their billion-dollar mistake from existence, hoping the world would forget it ever happened. But the damage was done. The failure of Snow White wasn't just financial. It was a devastating blow to Disney's carefully cultivated image of invincibility. At the heart of the Snow White disaster was Rachel Zegler, whose rise to stardom quickly turned into an unprecedented public collapse. Initially praised for her standout performance in West Side Story, Rachel entered Disney's massive reboot with confidence bordering on arrogance. She openly dismissed the beloved original, boldly proclaiming that her portrayal would fix a supposedly outdated tale. But this controversial stance backfired spectacularly, sparking fierce backlash that turned fans against her even before the movie premiered. Instead of gracefully managing criticism, Rachel spiraled publicly. Her responses became defensive and erratic, fueling the very controversy she was trying to control. During live interviews, she would launch into emotionally charged rants, alienating viewers and industry insiders alike. Her social media posts shifted from confident declarations to emotional breakdowns, where she appeared visibly distressed, struggling to hold back tears. One particularly viral Instagram clip showed Rachel pleading with fans for sympathy, emotionally comparing herself to a damaged artwork, begging audiences to support her despite her visible flaws. Instead of sympathy, she became an internet meme, her vulnerability ruthlessly mocked by audiences already fed up with her defiant attitude. Rachel's reputation unraveled further with her reckless comments about co-star Andrew Burnap. She publicly joked during a press event that Andrew's scenes might not even make the final cut, casually dismissing his efforts and humiliating him before audiences and critics alike. Burnap, understandably embarrassed, refused to attend the premiere, intensifying rumors of toxic behind-the-scenes tensions. Rachel's behavior wasn't just problematic, it was career-threatening. Disney executives eventually intervened, quietly trying to silence her, but by then, it was already too late. Rachel's image had been irreparably damaged, transforming from promising Hollywood star to industry liability almost overnight. As the disaster escalated, Rachel found herself facing the harsh reality that she wasn't just dealing with a failed movie. Her own career was at stake. The question haunting her now was whether the industry could ever forgive such a public and dramatic meltdown, or if she had permanently sabotaged her future. The disaster wasn't confined to domestic theaters. It quickly became a global embarrassment. While Disney scrambled to manage the unfolding crisis at home, international markets dealt even harsher blows. In a shocking and unprecedented move, Lebanon outright banned Snow White from cinemas nationwide. Authorities didn't simply pull the film from theaters. They banned all distribution and blocked imports entirely. For Disney, this was a public relations nightmare, amplifying negative headlines worldwide. The Lebanese decision wasn't just about poor attendance. It represented an outright rejection of Disney's new direction and Rachel Zegler's polarizing public image. But perhaps even more humiliating for Disney was the film's crushing defeat at the hands of an unlikely competitor, Lilo and Stitch. Disney's quirky animated classic, quietly re-released around the same time, unexpectedly began outperforming Snow White dramatically. Within its opening weekend alone, Lilo and Stitch grossed more domestically than Rachel Zegler's heavily marketed reboot managed in its entire U.S. box office run. The stark contrast wasn't lost on anyone. While Rachel's controversial performance was derided as preachy and divisive, audiences warmly embraced the simple charm of an animated alien and a little Hawaiian girl, underscoring Disney's complete misread of the cultural moment. Adding insult to injury, even Minecraft, initially dismissed by critics as too juvenile, quickly overshadowed Snow White at the global box office. Its carefree, non-controversial tone delivered exactly what audiences craved: lighthearted entertainment free from divisive messaging. Audiences, fatigued by political lectures and endless controversies, voted decisively with their wallets. Rachel's once-touted groundbreaking reboot became a cautionary tale of what happens when studios prioritize messaging over entertainment. As humiliations piled up internationally, Disney executives quietly but desperately began erasing mentions of Snow White from promotional materials and future plans. Their frantic efforts revealed the depth of embarrassment and financial devastation the film had caused globally. Disney was now trapped, struggling to distance themselves from the film without publicly acknowledging their monumental misstep, all while Rachel Zegler's name continued to dominate headlines for all the wrong reasons. Disney's humiliation extended far beyond empty theaters. The merchandising strategy also collapsed spectacularly. Typically, even moderately successful Disney films profit significantly from merchandise. Dolls, clothing, and themed accessories quickly become collector's items, driving additional millions in revenue. With Snow White, however, the exact opposite occurred. Disney had deliberately shipped limited quantities of merchandise, hoping scarcity would generate excitement and artificial demand. But this strategy backfired horribly. Months after release, shelves remained fully stocked with unwanted Snow White merchandise. Retailers struggled to offload items, slashing prices repeatedly, yet buyers stayed away. Store managers began reporting something Disney executives never expected. They couldn't even give away Snow White products. Doll sets featuring Rachel Zegler's Snow White character collected dust. T-shirts and mugs went ignored. Fan indifference turned into public mockery online, as social media users shared photos of overflowing shelves captioned with biting sarcasm. The merchandise became symbolic of Disney's broader failure, an embarrassing reminder that not only had the film flopped commercially, but audiences had actively rejected the characters and the narrative it tried to sell. Internally, Disney executives panicked. They swiftly began erasing all traces of Snow White from future marketing campaigns and quietly scrubbed social media accounts clean of promotional material. Executives privately discussed the disaster, acknowledging that their attempts to modernize classic stories had backfired badly, alienating rather than attracting fans. Merchandise, once a guaranteed profit generator, had become a financial burden and a source of profound embarrassment. The merchandise debacle wasn't just a loss of revenue, it was evidence that Disney had fundamentally miscalculated public sentiment. The failure forced executives to reconsider their entire strategy, quickly abandoning future controversial remakes planned in the same vein. Yet, despite their frantic efforts to erase the mistake, the damage was irreversible. Disney faced not only lost profits, but a damaged reputation, as audiences decisively rejected their vision. The merchandise disaster proved conclusively that audiences didn't just dislike Rachel Zegler's Snow White, they wanted nothing to do with it at all. As Snow White crumbled publicly, behind-the-scenes drama exploded into the spotlight, revealing tensions that Hollywood rarely allows to surface. At the center of this turmoil was Gal Gadot, cast as the iconic evil queen alongside Rachel Zegler. Gadot, known for her poised and diplomatic public persona, shocked fans when she made subtle but unmistakably critical comments during interviews. Rather than defend Rachel, or even the film itself, Gadot cautiously distanced herself from the unfolding disaster, blaming vague corporate misalignment rather than taking personal responsibility. In Hollywood speak, her statements were devastating. The most important thing on a film is teamwork, Gadot explained cryptically, emphasizing how exhausting and frustrating the process had become due to repeated setbacks. But Gadot's silence spoke louder than her carefully chosen words. When directly asked about her working relationship with Rachel Zegler, Gadot delivered a response that launched thousands of rumors. "I'll talk about that when I feel comfortable." This carefully guarded non-answer was immediately perceived as confirmation that the relationship between the two stars had become strained, or even hostile during filming. Gadot's words hinted that behind-the-scenes tension had spiraled beyond the normal stresses of production, leaving fans to speculate wildly about what could have happened on set. Further fueling speculation, co-star Andrew Burnap publicly distanced himself from the film entirely. Burnap conspicuously skipped the premiere and all promotional events. This wasn't mere scheduling conflict, it was a public statement. His absence was made worse by Rachel's offhand comment during press interviews, casually stating that Andrew's scenes might get cut, openly humiliating him and escalating tensions further. Burnap's complete avoidance of the film's promotional circuit sent a clear message. The set environment had become toxic, marked by disrespect and professional disregard. This behind-the-scenes chaos didn't just make headlines, it directly contributed to the film's downfall. Disney executives watched helplessly as internal friction became public knowledge, deepening the crisis and tarnishing their brand further. It became clear that the film's failure was not just box office disappointment, but the collapse of teamwork, respect, and basic professionalism. In a stunning move signaling just how deeply Disney regretted Snow White, executives abruptly canceled their next highly anticipated reboot, Tangled. Rumored to star Rachel Zegler as Rapunzel, Tangled was projected to be Disney's next billion-dollar franchise. However, without any warning, no trailers, teasers, or official statements, the project simply vanished. Industry insiders immediately understood the unspoken message. Rachel's presence had become a liability too significant to overlook. This wasn't just a routine decision to shelve a troubled production. It represented a fundamental shift in Disney's strategic planning. Executives were now openly fearful of repeating the same costly mistakes made with Snow White. Investing millions more into Rachel Zegler, who had rapidly become synonymous with controversy and box office failure, seemed unthinkable. Disney's move wasn't about recasting the role. It was a complete rejection of the narrative approach that had alienated fans. The abrupt cancellation didn't go unnoticed. Fans and industry commentators quickly connected the dots, recognizing that Rachel's divisive public persona had likely killed her chances of headlining another major Disney property. Her once promising career trajectory, praised just 2 years earlier for West Side Story, now hung precariously in the balance. Studios, wary of the toxic reputation Rachel had inadvertently cultivated, began reevaluating future collaborations, questioning whether the young actress could ever fully recover. Disney's cancellation of Tangled wasn't merely a business decision, it was a clear, strategic distancing from Rachel Zegler herself. The industry was signaling loudly, if Rachel couldn't carry a film backed by Disney's massive marketing machine, how could she be trusted with future blockbusters? As the news spread, it became increasingly clear that Rachel's career was no longer just troubled. It was on the brink of a catastrophic collapse, one that could permanently define her legacy in Hollywood. If there was one moment that perfectly symbolized the downfall of Snow White and Rachel Zegler's collapsing public image, it was the now infamous theater appearance. In an attempt to rally support for the film, Rachel showed up to a public screening, holding flowers and smiling for the cameras, as if it were a triumphant premiere. But what was meant to be a celebration quickly turned into one of the most humiliating visuals of her career. Photos and videos from the event immediately went viral, showing a nearly empty theater. Just a handful of scattered viewers sat silently in the dark, surrounded by rows of empty seats. Online, fans were brutal. Snow White and the 7 empty seats, one post read. Another joked that Rachel had brought flowers to a funeral, while others likened the scene to a ghost town press tour. The moment, intended to show confidence and resilience, instead became a meme, fueling the narrative that Rachel was out of touch with how far the film had truly fallen. The optics couldn't have been worse. Instead of changing the conversation, Rachel became the conversation, again for the wrong reasons. She had tried to show pride in her work, but the internet saw it as tone-deaf, almost delusional. Theaters weren't empty because of bad luck. They were empty because audiences had already made up their minds. To make matters worse, this wasn't a one-off event. It capped off weeks of crumbling PR efforts, failed interviews, emotional social media posts, and growing industry silence around Rachel's involvement in future projects. Where other stars might have pulled back to protect their image, Rachel leaned in, and it backfired spectacularly. This single theater visit, captured in photos and echoed in memes, became a defining image of the Snow White failure. It was no longer just a bad film. It was a personal and public unraveling that played out in real time, one awkward, flower-filled photo at a time. Despite Disney's enormous marketing push, Snow White couldn't even cross the $100 million mark at the US box office, a staggering failure by any measure. This wasn't just a modest underperformance, it was an outright collapse. For a film backed by one of the most powerful studios in the world, with a global rollout and a legacy IP, the numbers were catastrophic. Analysts expected Snow White to at least break even based on brand recognition alone. Instead, it hemorrhaged money from the moment it opened, with audiences rejecting it in droves. Critics weren't kind either. The film quickly earned one of the lowest IMDb scores of any modern Disney release. While the visual effects and production design received some praise, the storyline, casting choices, and overall execution drew relentless backlash. Most damning was the reaction from longtime Disney fans, who felt alienated by the studio's heavy-handed attempt to modernize a classic tale. Rachel Zegler, who had positioned herself as the new face of Disney princesses, suddenly found herself at the center of fan resentment. And then came the knockout punch: Minecraft, the movie. Released just weeks after Snow White, the live-action adaptation of the blocky video game blew past expectations and crushed Snow White at the box office. With no controversial casting, no political messaging, and a tone that simply aimed to entertain, Minecraft did what Disney's expensive reboot couldn't. It made audiences happy. Jack Black's voice performance, silly zombie chases, and pixelated visuals outperformed a film that had taken years and hundreds of millions to develop. The message was clear. Audiences weren't interested in a lecture. They wanted fun, escapism, and authenticity. Snow White had promised change, but delivered chaos. And as the numbers rolled in, the entertainment industry took notice. Studios began quietly reevaluating Rachel Zegler's involvement in upcoming projects, recognizing that the backlash wasn't fading, it was growing. In the wake of Snow White, the conversation had shifted from what went wrong with one film to whether Rachel could ever lead a major production again. In just 2 years, Rachel Zegler went from being Hollywood's rising star to one of the industry's most uncertain bets. After her breakout role in West Side Story, critics hailed her as the next big thing, a fresh face with talent, charm, and crossover potential. But after the catastrophic fallout of Snow White, that narrative has completely unraveled. Now, instead of being the actress everyone wants to work with, Rachel finds herself surrounded by doubt, controversy, and career-threatening questions. The industry has a long memory when it comes to public disasters, and Rachel's situation is proving no exception. According to multiple insider reports, production companies and studios are now hesitating to attach her to future projects. The fear isn't just about box office risk, it's about brand damage. For a rising actress, being viewed as polarizing or high risk is often the kiss of death in Hollywood, where perception can be more important than talent. One failed film can be dismissed, but a failed film tied directly to a lead actress's public behavior, that's a red flag. Even the fans who once championed her are divided. Some argue she was unfairly targeted, while others feel she brought the backlash upon herself with condescending interviews and dismissive remarks about Disney's original classics. Every appearance, every post, and every comment is now under a microscope, evaluated not for its content, but for its potential fallout. And the silence from Disney speaks volumes. Once proudly marketing her as the modern face of a reimagined princess, the studio has now gone quiet, removing references, cutting promotion, and shifting focus elsewhere. Rachel is now at a crossroads few young stars ever face so early in their careers. Can she stage a comeback, rebuild trust, and rebrand herself before Hollywood fully moves on? Or will Snow White become a permanent stain, defining her legacy before it ever had the chance to grow? At this point, the answer is still uncertain, but the clock is ticking. The collapse of Snow White didn't just affect Rachel Zegler, it forced Disney itself into a strategic reckoning. For years, the company had doubled down on reimagining classic animated films through a modern, often controversial lens. With each remake, they leaned further into social messaging, diverse reinterpretations, and dramatic narrative shifts. But Snow White made one thing painfully clear. Audiences weren't buying it anymore. The backlash wasn't just about one actress or one film. It was a loud rejection of Disney's broader direction. Behind closed doors, executives began scrambling to course correct. Marketing materials for Snow White vanished from Disney's official platforms. Mentions of the film were quietly scrubbed from press releases, upcoming event schedules, and even streaming service recommendations. Internally, sources say the studio has paused or outright canceled several planned remakes, opting instead to rethink how these stories are presented to the public. One major shift already underway is a return to source material. Rather than reworking beloved characters into something unrecognizable, Disney is now focusing on faithful adaptations that honor the spirit of the originals. There's also been a noticeable change in casting strategy, one that leans more toward neutral, fan-approved choices, rather than bold or potentially divisive experiments. The failure of Snow White also appears to have ended Disney's appetite for pushing politically charged narratives through children's films. While these themes might resonate in other genres, audiences made it clear they don't want classic fairy tales turned into battlegrounds for modern ideology. For many fans, Snow White represented the tipping point, the moment Disney's creative risks crossed into alienation. Whether this shift is permanent remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: Disney is now operating with far more caution. The company that once proudly led the charge in reimagining its own legacy is now walking it back, quietly, carefully, and with far less fanfare. As for Snow White, it may soon become Disney's most forgotten project, not because people will stop talking about it, but because Disney will do everything in its power to pretend it never happened. The fall of Snow White wasn't just a failed movie, it was a warning shot to the entire entertainment industry. Disney miscalculated, Rachel Zegler overreached, and the audience spoke louder than any trailer or press tour ever could. But this story isn't just about Hollywood, it's about the power of public opinion, the cost of ignoring your core audience, and the brutal speed at which a star can rise and fall. What do you think? Can Rachel Zegler recover from this? Should Disney continue reimagining classics or return to their roots? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the most dramatic moments in Hollywood, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon, because the next meltdown might be just around the corner.